There's been a question rattling around my brain for a few days now, and it was posed by a friend of mine who is a coach and a spiritual practitioner like moi. And it was in a voice note. We were just talking about something, and then she just randomly came up with this wonderful question that I don't have an answer to. But I wanted to share this because it's going to tie into what I want to talk about. It actually prompted this topic for Seared. Stories from the Stove podcast. My name is Paul Silva. Episode. The question was this. I'm going to boil it down. I'm going to reduce it down to its essential. And that was, is there something spiritual about food? As a chef, she was asking me, was there something spiritual about food? And she got a little technical and mentioned two Claires, Claire Gustance and Claire Aliens. If you have no idea what I just said, that's okay. Essentially, the Claires, as they're called, they're like, we all have intuition. We all have our gut feelings. We have all that. Now, if you extend that, we all have intuitive or psychic abilities that are connected to all the senses. So you've heard of clairvoyance, right? You've heard of clairvoyance, and it's like you see on TV or movies, and it's just like they see things. Well, clairvoyance is clear seeing. Now that shows up in many different ways. I'm not going to go through all the clairs. That's a whole different kind of podcast. A whole different. You search it up, Google it. You will find a gazillion things talking about the clairs. And again, clair meaning clear. So yeah, so you've heard of clairvoyance. So Claire Gustance and Claire Aliens, which she mentioned in her voice message, those are clear tasting and clear smelling. And of course, they go together. Like, have you ever tried to eat something and you, like when you're congested, or if you plug your nose and try to eat something, you can't taste it. It's greatly reduced because they're together, they're connected. And so Claire Gustance and Claire Aliens, for some people who are connected in certain ways, sometimes they will taste or smell something that is not there, or something they haven't eaten. Someone, let's say a medium that connects to one of your ancestors, maybe who was a smoker, they may smell smoke. They may say, I smell pipe. Was your uncle it smells like cherry? And you're like, oh my God, yeah, so they have that taste, same thing. It's not as common, but I know a divine channel who was sharing a story last year with me, how she was doing a reading for someone, and all of a sudden she tasted, I think it was like rotten fish or something, and it was just awful in her mouth, and it was awful. It was as if she had actually ingested it and put it in her mouth, and it took some time for that taste to come out. Now, this has happened to me, more so the smells, but not regularly, happens once in a while. Now, going back to the chefy stuff, is there a connection between being a chef and that? I don't have an answer. Some people will say that people who are more psychically gifted in those two specifically tend to become chefs or sommeliers or whatever it is. I don't know about that. No, I never in the 25 years that I was in the industry did I have a conversation with someone over this kind of stuff. They can also show up there's something that chefs do, and I'm sure anyone can do, honestly, is if you're reading a recipe or someone's explaining what they had, you can put it, what I would call it, into my mental mouth. Like, I can taste it. Like, if you say cinnamon and, vanilla and peach or something, like you can kind of taste that. Like, you can taste the peach and the cinnamon and the vanilla a little bit, maybe some sugar, maybe it's a compote. I don't know. Or if someone says chocolate and mint, you can taste it like in your mental mouth. It's not in your mouth, but you can get it. And is that a form of Claire Gustance? I don't think so. It's maybe someone can argue that. But the whole point of this, and this is where the episode is going, my dear friend, dear listener, is food and spirituality. Like, what is the connection? Are there connections? And of course there are, right? And I do want to share a little bit about how it's possible. How, because we talk about nourishing. Food is more than just something you stuff into your pie hole so you can make it for the rest of the day to fuel your body. Essentially, that's kind of what it is. But food is culture. Food is, parts of celebrations. Food is an integral part in so many cultural festivities and parts of culture and getting together and family. And like, there's books galore written about this kind of stuff. And so food is just more than nourishment. So of course it goes to stand that it can be spiritual in some way. Right? What just flashed in my head was, in the Catholic, I went to Roman Catholic schools, was the host, the Eucharist, like the body of Christ, as they would say. It's like these wafers. They could have used a little seasoning. I'm not gonna lie, they're pretty plain, but that was part of ritual, right? Or drinking the wine, that was part of ritual. That was religious. That was religious. And I'm not going to be talking about religious, but that's like an example of something that is connected to ritual, which can be religious. It could be ritual in other ways. So, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. So settle in, grab a vanilla wafer, grab any other kind of wafer. Nothing wrong with wafers. And we'll be back. I'm going to get right into this. When I was in culinary school, welcome back, by the way. Thank you. Thank you for holding. When I was in culinary school, one of my fellow students was Indigenous. And we all had to dress in our whites, and we had the toques, those paper toques that you see. And she had a feather in her toque. She always had a feather. And she would get into arguments with one of the instructors, because we were in a lab, we were cooking. Like, it wasn't like a theory class or anything. And they would get into arguments because she felt it was her right, or whatever it was, to express herself and her Indigenous culture in that way. And she also had like a tattoo, which is different, right? And also she had jewelry. And so there was an argument all the time because health and safety reasons, jewelry, doesn't matter what it was, it had to come off, right? Like, it can get caught in a machine, it can fall into the food, different reasons. So I think they had a compromise where she was allowed to keep the feather, but she had to take off the jewelry. And I think that worked for them. I didn't have a problem with it. If the feather drops, you're going to see. I don't think there's anything dirty about it, but that's just me. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. I was like, not my circus, not my monkeys. But it was interesting because there's when you think about the Indigenous cultures around the world, essentially, there's such a deep connection to food. And there was one, pardon me, there was one Indigenous chef that I worked with as well. And he shared, he had done, I think on TV and stuff like that, he had shared and his work and his connection, and other Indigenous creators I've seen online, et cetera, et cetera. They're out there and they share so much about the land. And I'll share a little bit about that. But is food spiritual? Is it? Now, when I was working with food, it was just a product. I never felt connected to it. It was just something I did. I enjoyed it. I was passionate about it, but I never got into the like farm to table thing. And it just wasn't important to me. It just was. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't important to me. Like, I didn't care at the time. I didn't care that tomatoes came from Chile. I didn't care that the strawberries came from Mexico. Like, I was not about like, it's like the richness and got to keep it local, because there was all these culinary trends and, slow food and, the local farm, nose to tail thing. It had like almost like an Indigenous type of vibe to it, if you will, in terms of making connections with the land and not harming, whatever it is that we would harm in all this mass farming and mass producing and meats and fish and all that. To me, it wasn't important. And for a lot of chefs, it was important. And it was like this, that's just what it was. And as I've gotten older, I see the connection now. And I think it is important. But I was not willing to fight for it. Let's put it that way. But as I've stepped more into my spiritual self and, doing the work that I do now, I can see how it can be really connected. And so is food spiritual? I think in some ways we can look at it, in a few ways. If you look at it at one level, there is a transformation. Because, chefs, we take raw ingredients, we transform them into something lovely and pretty to look at and nourishing. And it can be maybe seen as a metaphor, if you will, for spiritual growth, where you take this raw potential within yourself and transform it into something meaningful. And, people will talk about chefing, cooking as an art. I did an episode, I think it was episode 24, where I talked about my thoughts. I thought it was more of a craft than an art, but if you say it's an art, I'm cool with that. I think it's more of a craft. But there's a creative element. There are artistic elements to it. And so you take this product, this raw product, and you elevate it in some ways, and that can be seen as a metaphor for spiritual growth, emotional growth, mental growth. And so I accept that. I like that imagery of taking something and transforming it and elevating it into something different. And there's something very creative about that. And there can be a spiritual. It's not like, when we're cooking, we have tickets, we got shits, we gotta pump it out. We're not in communion necessarily with the food. It might be different if you're cooking at home or cooking with family, or it might be a different environment. And on the line, it's a little bit different. And if you work on the line or have worked on the line, you were able to connect spiritually with the food, I applaud you. That's amazing. I wasn't there. I wasn't there in any way developmentally to make that connection. So it is possible to look at that. The other one, and connecting to that creativity, if we just talk about that, there's, if we look at spiritual art in all different ways, like we definitely whether it's sculpture, whether it's visual art, mixed media, whatever it is, music for sure. We have no problem saying that is spiritual art. Some people, again, will say food can be a form of art. Some people may, like, everyone has different ways of expressing their spirituality. Most people express it in different ways, multiple ways. I do. And some people maybe use food as a way, just not necessarily to make it look like art, but to them, there's an art to the cooking, if that makes sense. And it's about innovation. It's about creation, right? And if you go deep in this one, right? Deep in the loam, you talk about creation itself, right? We're creating, we're building, we're crafting. And again, that can feel very deep for some people. Like for some people, cooking is it's their thing. Like it's their escape. It's their way they connect to themselves. They connect to things outside of themselves. And so that's another way that food can be spiritual. Mindfulness is another one. We talk about meditation and mindfulness. Again, staying in the present, staying in the moment. For me, biking, believe it or not, is very mindful. Because biking, and I'm in Toronto, it's a big city, but I go to a lot of trails. I do a lot of street biking, but I also go on trails. I go in big parks, all that kind of stuff. Doesn't matter where I'm biking. I have to be present. I have to watch for making sure I don't get a door prize, when they open up the car door, which has happened before. It's not fun. You're watching for pedestrians. You're watching for squirrels. You're watching for other animals. You're watching for this, that, and the other. If you're on trails, you're looking for tree roots. What's sticking out? What's this? You have to be present, or else you're going to go flying ass over tea kettle. So to me, biking is very mindful. But for others, cooking does that. Like, because it demands focus and attention to detail, right? There's a sense of calmness. Like, how many people cook just to relax? Probably many of you. You go home, you're tired. Now, some people just hate cooking. They just, order pizza again. or they'll just do the bare minimum just to get food on the table. But other people revel in it. They love it. They plan it. They shop for it. They can't wait to make their whatever beef Wellington or some wild recipe they caught online or in one of their sacred books. And that's the thing too, right? Cookbooks. Here's another one. This just occurred to me. Like cookbooks, for some, it's like seems sacred. It's like a sacred text. It's so wild. It's amazing because there's something about it. Like you read it and you're transforming the word into something. It's almost like a sacred text. Anyway, some people treat their cookbooks sacredly. I think cookbooks should be messy. I think the best compliment you can give a cookbook writer is to show them your messy cookbook with pages dog-eared and stuff spilled all over and flour dusted. Like that is the highest compliment. Like you're not supposed to like have it in a, some glass case or something. Anyway, mindfulness. For some people, there's a ritual to the cooking. For me, when I'm at home, I'm cooking, I've got to make sure the sink is clear. That means everything's in the dishwasher. That means everything that is not necessary around me, I clear out. There's a little ritual. I'll play music or I'll listen to a podcast or whatever it is. And I just make sure that my area is clean. I've got everything out in a certain way. There's a ritual to it. And for some, they have their own version of that ritual. And so there's a mindfulness to it because you're in the present, you're in the moment. Another way that food can be, like, I guess, spiritual or connected to spirituality is gratitude. And this goes to seasonality, right? Grateful for these local, raspberries, or people who do feel a connection to the earth. Like, again, these farm to table folks. There may be you may find a connection and just like, I'm so grateful for this lamb. I'm so grateful for these garlic bulbs. I'm so grateful for this food. And I know a lot of people who speak to their food and thank the food. And thank you for nourishing my body. Thank you for being present. Thank you for growing and fighting all the elements and fighting the insects and all that so you can grow, so you can be here and that we can eat this. And, on a bigger scale, chefs definitely, when this is what I talked about earlier, using especially those who have bigger profiles, public profiles, to promote like environmental awareness and social responsibility, etc. But on a sort of micro level, it can be just like, thank you. I'm so grateful. When I go grocery shopping, I tell you, I tear up. And it sounds silly. I tear up because I realize just because the food here in Canada, it costs so much. It is ridiculous. My American friends, if you think groceries are expensive, I would kill to have your grocery prices. That is how astronomical it is here to shop. It's so when I go to a grocery store, I know I'm so grateful that I'm in a position where I can afford to buy groceries. And that's gratitude. So for me, the gratitude is at the part where I purchase. Not so much when I'm cooking, but sometimes I do. I'm so grateful to have a full fridge or to have food cooked in the fridge. So, and the other thing too then is nourishment. I mentioned this a few times. It's connecting the physical and the spiritual and the social at times, right? Like I cook, cooks, it's sustenance. I make food, or you make food. You're providing sustenance. But for some people, it's soul food. It's soul food. Like it depends. Your grandma, your abuela. You hear all the stories of people, like when they were kids, helping at family, and just all the parents and all the family members, whoever in the kitchen, and the laughing, and just that's the bonding that happens. They say the party's always in the kitchen. Kitchen's always where the party's at. There's something about food that is nourishing beyond the physical. And it's social gatherings, festivals, celebrations. Think of all the food that's involved, and certain foods, and some like whatever. There's so many examples. My brain is cluttered. Spring lamb, and Ramadan, at the end of Ramadan, and all these, like, there's certain foods that people bring in as representations of certain things. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And people breaking bread together, that kind of imagery that comes up, and that's nourishment. And for some, that touches their soul, that touches their spirit. And so that too can be very spiritual. There's so much that's coming. I'm not going to share everything, but there's so much that floods my mind right now. It's not clairvoyance, but it's something that is really touching, right? Because food is more than just stuff we just, we jam in our face. It can be, like I said, but there's so much more involved. Okay, I'll let you take a quick break, and I'm going to share a little bit more about the Indigenous and a little bit more, and I want to share some really cool things with you. So be right back. Welcome back, my friend. Speaking of gratitude, I am very grateful that you are here, homie. I appreciate anyone who is here and taking this in. It means a lot to me. It really does. I love doing this, and there may not be millions of people listening, but you're listening, and that's most important. I wanted to touch on the Indigenous traditions, I guess. I'm not an expert. I'm not Indigenous myself. It is something that I've always been drawn to. And I think that's because of my shamanic connections within. I'm not going to get into that right now. But our youngest son, who is adopted, he is part Indigenous. And I feel like there's something about me helping him and him helping me in this. And we have learned a lot through him and through his, blood family and his foster family and just, other parts of the community, other people in the community who we've met and, gone to powwows and all sorts of things like that, ceremonies. And so we've learned a little bit, and of course, other information out there. So again, I'm not Indigenous. I'm not of that community. And so I'm only speaking as someone who, is kind of on the outside. So I just want to make that clear. But what I have seen and what I do really love about Indigenous, and this is general, of course, like there's so many different tribes and et cetera, et cetera. But I do love how when it comes to food, there's such gratitude and respect, right? Cooking it can be so much deeply spiritual compared to non-Indigenous. Again, that's broad brushstrokes. That's what I do here. But there's something about, being intertwined with the connection to the land, their ancestors, the natural world. And so part of that is gratitude and respect. And you'll see a lot of cultures expressing gratitude to the land, to the animals, the fish, the plants for providing sustenance. There'd be prayers and offerings, sometimes made before hunting, gathering, harvesting afterwards, thanking the animal for allowing it to sustain them and also to clothe them and to make tools or whatever it was, especially, back in the day. And it's that connection to the land that is so huge, right? Because traditionally, a lot of, like, all the food was sourced from the land, and preparing them, whether it's wild asparagus or whatever it is, berries, the act of preparing it is a way to honor and connect with the natural world, right? Fishing for salmon can be seen as a sacred act. Preparing these foods in certain ways at certain times can be very, very much about connecting to the land and also the culture, right? And it's that culture identity and heritage that's also added to the mix, so to speak. Traditional recipes and cooking techniques passed through generations, preserving, like we're talking about the some of the OGs when it comes to preserving food, right? Like drying, salting, curing, all that stuff, pickling. a lot of that is because obviously back they didn't have refrigeration, they didn't have any ways to store. And so a lot of stuff, I remember making candied salmon. I used to love, trying some of these recipes, and candied salmon was one way of preserving salmon. Smoking, right? All of that, especially smoking. And so doing all these things, again, a lot of this was done through community. Everyone wasn't doing it on their own, right? So it was a way of, and people taught one another, right? Things passed. That's how things got passed through, was through oral tradition. And so it was a way of strengthening community bonds and passing on cultural knowledge. Was a collective, right? As tribes, as peoples coming together. And the other part too is about healing and well-being, like that mind-body-spirit connection being strengthened. Like many other cultures, not just Indigenous, but certainly it started with Indigenous, is seeing that food has healing properties and can be used to promote physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And, people to this day still see food as medicine, food as nourishment. And in many ways it is, absolutely. And people connect. There's a connection, of course, in what we ingest to how we show up physically, right? Junk in, junk out, right? There is definitely a connection. The scientific medical community sees it. And there are certain, of course, natural remedies out there, whether it's plants, herbs, whatever it is. And that preparation can be seen as a sacred act, in ancient Chinese medicine, all these things like certain herbs and certain bulbs and this, like it comes together, sounds like Hogwarts, right? Coming up with these potions, but in a way it kind of is, right? And though it's not a meal necessarily, it's still something that you're ingesting, and it's healing, and certain foods can heal certain things or whatnot. And so all of this, again, can very much be seen as spiritual, and connecting to that mind, body, spirit, connecting to creator, connecting to whatever it is. And I think that we have obviously lost some of that in translation into the modern kitchens, but there are a lot of people who still hold on to that, right? And I think of my colleague, my fellow student with the feather. I don't know what she's doing now. I didn't talk to anyone really after I graduated. It's not like we had phones and social media, and I don't know where they're. But I guarantee actually that she was not only connected with food back then, but still is now. And if she has children, grandchildren, like that, she has passed that on in the modern era. And there is something still kind of holy in some ways. And I don't mean holy in a religious way, but there is something just really tangible and untangible at the same time when you connect food with spirituality. And I think it's a beautiful thing, and again, I don't think about this when I'm making pizza or whatever, but when you step back and look at the greater picture, there is something just really grounded and beautiful in all of this. And I'd be curious if there's something with you with food and cooking. You can definitely leave comments. If you're watching on YouTube, I'd love to hear your experiences or your thoughts. I have a Facebook group or a Facebook page, sorry, not a group, where you can leave comments there, or you can email me. One thing, speaking of spirit and spirituality and all that, you may be surprised when I said at the beginning, as I'm also a spiritual practitioner, this is something that I have done for some years. And I'm not a chef anymore, as you know. I've been retired since 2018. And so in the time, I've become, and still am, a coach, but I've done a lot of work on spirituality and, spiritual counseling, spiritual coaching, whatever you want to call it. And I've also do readings, etc. So this is my invitation to you. This is stuff that I do I've done many readings with clients, and we use different, I call found objects or just objects. And so there's divination. I have bones, charms, tarot, oracle, intuitive stuff I go outside and I find, hence found objects. And so it's a combination of tapping into your energy. I ask ahead of time, what is it that you want to work on? What is something that you want to focus on? What is something that you might be stuck with, et cetera, et cetera. And then introducing spirit. It could be messages from your guides, could be messages from your higher self, general, more particular to you. And we bring that in. And also I add a little bit of my coaching and just say, like, so you leave the session with an actionable plan, some steps that you can take. So I am offering these readings. I will leave the links there. You can do live, and that is $159 US. Or you can do remote, where you don't have to be there. I will do the reading and I will record it and I'll send you a video. But both of them, you will have a video, and I'll also take some photos of cards, everything that I've used, so you have it. And the remote is $101 US. And yeah, please, book up. This will be a good time, because as we're exiting the year, going into a new year, maybe there's something that you want to shift, something you want to change. And I'm happy to help illuminate maybe some of the darker corners, if you will. So you will find the links in the description. I'll post them there. And yeah, things are changing. I'm going to be changing up a few things for sure. And my long-term goal is to work with men, mostly men, and working on their spiritual path and spiritual awakenings and all that fun stuff. So yeah, so if you didn't know, now you know. Cat's out of the bag. All right. And hence you can see why I was drawn to this topic. Okay. Thanks for being here once again. Kitchen's closed. Now scram.